the central question is, how can we stimulate our own supply of these critical minerals? That has really been the overarching policy question. And I think tonight we're going to hear a discussion of how well existing policy strategies that are embedded in the Defense Production Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US, the Energy Act of 2020, which defines what a critical mineral is and creates a list that would give them preferential policy treatment, was created. The European Union has also done this in the Critical Raw Minerals Act. And all of these acts embody different policy strategies, which I think we're going to talk about. Things like subsidies, grants, tax credits, tax exemptions, offtake provisions that guarantee prices for companies, a natural defense stock, and state capitalism. Our government owning parts of companies that are producing these minerals. And so I really look forward to the conversation. I think you're gonna see some critical minerals on the stage tonight. So I'm very excited about the kind of hands-on part of tonight's discussion as well. You're going to hear from some really amazing experts in this space. And to lead the conversation is Professor Dilawar Saeed. And I like to start with his bio in reverse, because he is a Longhorn through and through. He holds an undergraduate degree in computer science and economics from UT, and an MBA from Wharton. And he went on to found several companies in the AI and software and consumer web space, and then went on to a career in public service, where he worked as the Deputy Administration for the U.S. Small Business Administration and Special Envoy for Commercial Affairs at the State Department. And during that period of public service, he worked quite a bit to drive small business recovery post-pandemic, with record levels of federal support and coordinated disaster recovery in the aftermath of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. And then I am very grateful that he has come to UT, and he is a professor of practice both here at the Macomb School and at the LBJ School. So without further ado, thank you, Professor Saeed.
Thank you so much, JR, for your kind introduction and for your incredible partnership. It's an honor to be working alongside with you on these critical issues. It's great to see now many friends in the room as we have built this community over the last few forums, last few weeks. And before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge some colleagues across campus who have been instrumental in this forum. One of the things that I appreciate is that we are building collaboration with various schools and departments. Professor Brian Corgle, who heads up the Energy Institute, has been an amazing supporter of this forum. I don't know if he's here tonight, but we're going to be teaming up with LBJ and Energy Institute on some of these conversations going forward. Professor Fred Beach, who heads up Jackson School of Geosciences, has been instrumental. And I want to acknowledge our own colleague, LBJ colleague, Professor Josh Bisbee, who has been an expert in here is Josh, actually. He was going to stand in for me in case I missed my flight from Philadelphia tonight. So thank you for your amazing support. The last two conversations that we've had, previous one was on trade, the global trade, and we talked about tariffs at length. We started the forum series with AI and innovation, and tonight we are talking about critical minerals and rare earths. They may sound disparate topics, but they're all deeply connected. And this was deliberate that we ordered these forums in this particular order. The United States cannot actually succeed in the age of AI as a force to be reckoned with without having access to critical ingredients and inputs that power our batteries, our devices, EVs, advanced defense equipment, and chips. And just the last literally few weeks of events were a purview that trade policy can be used as a potent instrument to disrupt supply chain of critical minerals. So there's a reason why we are talking about this in this order. And we will have a conversation to see how do we tackle this challenge. I want to share this data, and I'm starting these forums often with some data point just to give a sense of what the state of the problem is. And JR alluded to this as well. According to U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, U.S. is dependent, 100% import dependent, on top 12 of the 50 critical minerals we need to power a modern life. We have almost no domestic processing in any of the rare earths. So we actually have rare earths. Rare earths are found here. We have rocks here. But we do not have any processing capability in the United States for any of the rare earths: lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel. And here's one thing that I found striking. For copper, which is a fairly foundational material, there are only 2 smelters in the entire United States of America. 2 smelters, one in Arizona and one in Utah. And copper, by the way, I don't need to tell you, it powers everything. And with this focus on data centers and how we are doubling our grid capacity every now and then, we need that material. It's a basic material. And China, in the meantime, as JR alluded, has been building this up for almost 70 years as a strategic plan, as a very deliberate strategy across the entire vertical value chain, from mining, processing to refining. And we saw the recent flashpoint when the US-China trade war ramped up. China responded very strategically in a very precise manner to put export controls on rare earth minerals. So when President Trump and President Xi met in Seoul after APEC, one of the key outcomes from that summit was that China eased export controls on rare earths for, guess what, 1 year. And therein lies the problem. Given the elemental nature, pun intended, of rare earth minerals and elements, we cannot have an ad hoc policy. We have to think long-term. We have to be strategic. We have to build on legislation that JR referred to and other things that the administration is doing in a coordinated manner. And we have to make sure we can tackle this challenge in a way that the United States is absolutely capable of tackling. And that's the conversation we're having tonight. And we're extremely lucky. We have 3 terrific viewpoints. One, from the highest level of policy. Second, we have a builder, innovator. So I'm a builder in my private life. I believe builders are critical in these conversations. And from investors who are helping augment the resources we need to meet this challenge. So let me introduce our panel tonight. Jose Fernandez, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. I had the privilege to work alongside Jose at the State Department. And I saw how hard Jose worked. We're going to talk about this, given the breadth of portfolio, as you can see, that's such a broad title. Prior to that role, Jose in the Obama administration served as Assistant Secretary for Economic and Business Affairs Bureau, which is part of the E family. He's a very accomplished lawyer and a former trustee of Dartmouth, and was totally fine with who come tonight with us as well. Dr. Anna Scott brings the innovative perspective. Anna is the founder and CEO of Mithril Minerals, a deep sea mining company. And Tim Tummerbuth, who is an investor and has founded Nomadic Venture Partners, a Colorado-based VC firm that is backing entrepreneurs who are building solutions for mining. So please join us at the stage, and I'll join you shortly. Give a round of applause to our panelists. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for making the trip. It's glad to have you, and thanks to Tim as well. I know you're based in Austin, so it's great to have you all here. So Jose, I'll start with you first. I think it's fair to say that we have a near, or rather a rare, bipartisan consensus on rare earth minerals, pun intended, because of the challenge that we are facing when it comes to closing the gap with China. You spearheaded, as part of your portfolio, you were the architect of the Mineral Security Partnership under the Biden administration. Would love to hear your thoughts on, before we talk about some of the initiatives that were done and how we build upon them, given your broad purview and your focus on this particular issue, how do you think about a long-term industrial strategy when it comes to closing the gap with China for rare earths and critical minerals?
Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming. My daughter went to school here, so I'm very familiar with the hook'em horns. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Look, this was maybe the easiest thing to sell in my job, and yet the hardest to implement. And that's something that I think we've got to keep in mind, which is part of the job that Delaware and I had to do with coming up with the policy, but anybody can come up with the ideas. The hard thing is to make them a reality, right? Implementation in the Wall Street world, it's called execution risk. So the policy and the problem, which was also an opportunity, is we've got a vulnerability. The dean talked about the fact that 10, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, the US had a thriving mining industry. No longer. So what do we have today? We have critical minerals and rare earths that are needed for just about anything that we use, be it semiconductors, automobiles, defense, planes. And those critical minerals are, to a large extent, controlled by one country, the PRC, China. And those numbers are enough to keep you awake at night. Graphite, which you need for computers, 100%. 100% owned, mined, or processed by the PRC. Lithium, which we need for EV batteries, depending on the year, anywhere from 70 to 80%. The list goes on. Cobalt, manganese, copper, nickel. That's the vulnerability and the problem. The opportunity that I saw for us is to see how we could get our companies, the US companies, and our allies to work together in order to solve the problem. The problem is exacerbated by something that those of you who follow antitrust law will be familiar with, and that's predatory pricing. What does a monopolist do? If you have 80 to 90 to 100% of a market, and you get a competitor that wants to enter that market, you just lower your prices to such an extent that competitor goes out of business. That's what's happened in the last couple of years with things like lithium. The demand for lithium last year went up 30%. Demand for lithium. The prices for lithium, and I'm not exaggerating, went down by 80%. What did that mean? Well, Australia had a number of lithium mines. They stopped. They could no longer get financing. So you've got this vulnerability, which is also an opportunity, but at the same time, there are some obstacles along the way. Early on in the administration, President Biden issued an executive order. Trump has done more or less the same. And when I say that this was an easy sell, it was an easy sell because when I went to the Koreans, and I had just gotten gotten confirmed, and I was in the job for maybe a couple of weeks. I said, look, I'm thinking of doing this. I've got this problem that's keeping me awake. Maybe you can help. And they just smiled and gave me a hug. Why? Because Korea, if you recall, in 2012, okay, we've seen this movie before. In 2012, the PRC cut off rare earths and exports to Korea. A couple of years later, they did the same thing with Japan. This may be a new topic, but it's an old tactic, and that's a vulnerability that we saw, and that's why we will talk about it. I'm sure. I spent a lot of time talking to our allies, talking to our companies, going to places that I had never been to, and Greenland, Panama, DRC, Ukraine. There's a through line here, and one of those is critical minerals. I'll stop with that.
So I'll pick up on that. That in these countries that you travel to, would you please share for the audience who was part of the MSP, this partnership? And it's also a different tactic that the Biden administration took versus where President Trump has taken. He's more one-on-one deals, and we'll talk about that as well. Do you mind sharing who are some of the countries and where you saw the results? Yes, they wanted to hug us. There was alignment, but in terms of us diversifying our supply chain, where were we able to make an impact?
Okay. The Mineral Security Partnership, we created it. We announced it in 2012. It consisted of 14 countries plus the European Union, comprised over 55% of the global GDP, and we were going to do four things. So we plan, and it's still in place, to do four things. Number one, invest together and finance together. Secondly, share information on the theory that, and this is important, no one country can solve this by itself. Right? The U.S., yes, we have mining resources, but we don't have enough. We do not have the 50 critical minerals. We've got to get others to pitch in, and they need us to pitch in as well. So invest together, share information together, recycle, and then lastly, something that we felt very strongly about, and hopefully we can spend a little bit of time on it, which is we needed to make sure that we engaged in a race to the top and not a race to the bottom. What does that mean? If you look at the history of mining around the world, there's a bunch of feasible mining projects that were perfectly feasible and could have been profitable, and yet didn't see the light of day. They didn't see the light of day because communities didn't want them. In places like Peru, 30% of the world's copper cannot be mined because the roads are blocked. Panama kicked out a mining company the other day. In Serbia, it's all over the world. So you've got to work with communities. You've got to show them how that you're not going to have them trade their economic welfare for bad environmental policies. And so that was the fourth prong. We needed to change the terms of the debate because we felt that if it turned into a contest as to who could pollute the most, who could pillage villages the most, who could take the minerals and just go take them home and process them there, we would not win that race. And I'll tell you, another hug. I was in an African country, and I told them that we wanted to have value-added processing in his country. And the guy again got up and said, Jose, this is what I've been talking about. We cannot just be an extractive country. We've got to have the knowledge and the expertise in order to bring processing and refining companies here. So invest, share information, elevate the process, and lastly, recycling. Right now, there's very little recycling of critical minerals. Why? Because most of there's not enough critical minerals out there to recycle. But the IEA and others believe that if we do it right, in 20 years, about 15 to 25% of the minerals that go into a battery could be recycled. And just think of that. Think of how much less money you'd have to spend, how much environmental damage you might avoid. And so that's the fourth angle. And by the way, just like in all of these things, there's money to be made.
Absolutely. So Jose, very briefly, just to be prescriptive, given your experience along these four dimensions with the MSP, and you obviously traveled the world, you were in Africa, you were in Central America, you were in Asia, is any one of the dimensions where you felt there was progress that we should now continue to move forward? Just lessons learned from that perspective.
Well, look, we ended up, this is a problem that was a long term in the making, and it'll be a long term to solve. You're not going to solve this overnight, which will get us at some point to trade policy. In the 2 years that we had the MSP, we had 15 projects that we brought forward. 8 of them mining, 5, if I remember correctly, refining, and 2 recycling. all over the world. And something fell. Can you hear me? Yeah. So we had 15 projects, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in 2 years, a mine that takes 10 to 15 years to develop, that's pretty good. And we had about 30 of them in process. What did we learn? I think something we learned is that producing countries wanted this. We went to Greenland. I brought, 20, 30 companies in the middle of the winter. It was pretty but cold. And we had 2 deals. We came out of that meeting with 2 deals. Same thing in the Congo. So we are pushing on an open door. We just have to do it right. And it's not about taking over a country. It's to find ways to work with them and to make them understand that they will benefit, because that's what they want.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We'll move to you, Anna. So you're a scientist turned entrepreneur. When we had a conversation, I was struck by a conversation about your journey to entrepreneurship featuring Ben Jettis, former president of NAACP. Tell us a story. I think it's fascinating and also inspire scholars in the audience to consider entrepreneurship down the road. And then also tell us more about the company as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for coming out tonight. And the traffic was a little crazy. My name's Anna. I am an unlikely entrepreneur, I guess you could say. My background was I thought I was gonna be a scientist. I have a PhD in earth science. And towards the end of my PhD program, I actually ended up starting a company with some buddies because, in part, I ran into somebody who was a VC, and I was basically building these air monitoring boxes on my kitchen table with my grad school buddies, and we had raised some money from crowdfunding, and someone at my university was like, I went to Johns Hopkins University, which is not known for its environmental technology spin-outs. And they didn't quite know what to do with us, but some, well-meaning, person who's used to commercializing vaccine or cancer research or something said, "Oh, you should meet with this VC." And so I bike over to the campus, that side of campus, which is the other side of the city. By the time I got there, they'd canceled the meeting, but I showed up anyways. And they're like, "Okay, we'll give you 5 minutes." And I ran into this guy, and he said, "Hey, sounds like what you're working on is really cool. You should start a company." I think I laughed. And he was like, no, seriously. And he said, there's a couple books you should read. You should read The Innovator's Dilemma. You should read The Lean Startup. There's a third book that apparently did not leave an impact. And then he said, you should think about applying to startup accelerators. And that was actually how I ended up here in Austin, Texas. I applied to an accelerator program with Techstars at the time. And ended up here, and I thought, wow, if someone wants to, invest in my company and move me to Austin, Texas, this sounds like a pretty good deal. And I've been coming from a graduate student background, so the money was, was used to not making anything anyways, and just lived off of HEB tacos, and I couldn't even afford taco sauce. It's really terrible to remember, but that was my equivalent of ramen. It was the rotisserie chicken, the HEB tortillas, and the worst, the cheapest, the Hill Country Fair cheese. I don't recommend that, but it's been an amazing ride and experience, and I think what it taught me was that you can go out and do unlikely things. You can insert yourselves into situations where maybe you have no real business being there, but if nobody's doing it, I don't know, why the heck not show up? What's the worst going to happen? People tell you no, but eventually somebody tells you yes. And so that's kind of how I got here into what I'm working on now, which is a startup called Mithril Minerals. We're a robotics company that's building low-cost, low-impact robots to help deep-sea mining companies pick up the ore that they're planning to mine at a fraction of the cost and an order of magnitude less impact. And I started doing it with the same spirit of nobody else is doing this. I looked around and nobody could talk to industry, and nobody could think about a way to innovate in a low-cost, low-complexity way. And so that's how I ended up here.
Well, thank you for sharing. And just very quickly mention, I mentioned Ben Jallis' name. I met Ben Jallis at the DNC back in the day when he was running NAACP. So when you mentioned Ben's name, I was surprised. But Ben also had a venture role after he lost his race to the governor in Maryland.
To maybe add on to this, like Ben was running as a socialist, and he actually lost this race for being like too progressive, too socialist.
That's right.
And I think the irony is, like, I know Ben. This story, if you were in Maryland, like this would not be a story worth telling, because everybody knows somebody who, like, Ben has told to go out and start.
And we thought it was fascinating that you have someone of Ben's background who is advising you on pursuing entrepreneurship. So never let political labels, lead you astray. Everybody's trying to create opportunities. So great story. Let's talk about deep sea mining. Do you mind sharing a little bit more for those who are not familiar with the thesis on this? You obviously are building a robot. I believe you tested a robot last week off the coast in Seattle. So talk a little bit about the concept of this and for those who are not familiar with.
Yeah. So what I'm holding right now are a type of resource that exists at the bottom of the ocean, and they sit loose primarily on the seabed. And this is called a polymetallic nodule, poly meaning many metals. They form over millions and millions of years. It's a really cool rock story. This is not maybe a geology audience, so I'll hold myself back. Tom and I will nerd out later.
Yes.
But suffice it to say, they have some interesting amounts of critical minerals, specifically copper, cobalt, nickel, a lot of manganese, some rare earths, zinc. And people have been talking about picking these up for a very long time, since the 70s and even before as a commercial entity. But it's kind of had fits and starts to on whether or not it's going to go forward, I would say, up until about this year, and it does kind of feel like we're really at the I don't know what the analog is, but it feels like we're just at the beginning. I just got back from this big conference, and hearing all of these regulators and mining companies talk, it really felt like we're at the beginning of a gold rush. Like I've always wondered what a gold rush felt like, and I think I know now. But there's a lot of excitement over these reserves, because there's like trillions of dollars of these rocks sitting at the bottom of the ocean. They're much more accessible in some senses, maybe less accessible in others. And so, they're quite easy to go get if you're the kind of person who knows how to get a boat and go really deep, which a lot of people in Houston know how to do. Some other places, deepwater Brazil, for example, if you've worked offshore. But there's also some, like any mining and minerals play, there's of course consequences to this. And so, one of the big consequences is the ecological or the potential ecological consequences, because of course there's some heavy uncertainty around this. Now, if you were to ask some of the folks that I was just in the room with last week, they would say, we've done the science, we've done the studies, it's good to go. The impacts are not as bad as the conservationists would say, so like full steam ahead. We try and take the other approach, which is to say, like, hey, we think we could maybe innovate in this context and come up with a way that is less impactful. And so, maybe to be totally glib, to say, hey, rather than maybe spending a lot of our money on like reports that like shockingly come out in our favor, why don't we take a bit of a tabula rasa approach and work with scientists and like iterate on our design until we come up with something that like everyone agrees is less impactful. Environmentally impactful.
So, just to clarify, these are robots that are literally diving onto the bottom of the floor and ocean floor. It's about 3.5 miles, right? You said. I mean, it's pretty deep, and you can imagine that any mechanical object that you've created, it has to pass that 3.5 mile, and then be able to then pick these, or as you said, harvest. I thought it was an interesting term. Harvest these rocks off the bottom. Off the floor of the ocean, and of course, you will also pick ocean salt along with it as well. Then you bring it back up. So, I want to make sure people understand. That's what the process is. There has been some controversy about deep sea mining. A couple of things people say is, look, one, you're picking other things. You don't know what's at the bottom of the ocean floor. There is, it's still an unknown, we haven't fully explored. There could be some ecological issues. The other issue that people bring up is that sometimes there are international waters. Who has a jurisdiction over these? Do you want to share, how do you respond to that? Is the industry or policy side of things, are they coming to a point where they're saying, okay, look, this is an area where we can actually tackle given some of these issues?
Well, first on the policy thing, having just met regulators from, I don't know, a good I don't know, a handful of countries that are, I will say, I've worked with some regulators in my days, and these are very enthusiastic regulators. So I'll just say that. There's a number of domestic water, like these rocks exist all over the world. And so what we're seeing is that a number of national entities are kind of moving full steam ahead on this. And so people have been whispering about some upcoming lease auctions that are going to be happening in the next couple of quarters. So that's where I expect to see this happening is within the domestic waters of countries. A lot of the press on this has centered on what's happening in the international arena, but I think quietly behind the scenes, there have been a number of countries that have like snuck up and launched like full-scale deep sea mining like legal programs. Like, so for example, India, I never hear anyone report on this. In India, over the last several years, put together like this deep sea minerals code. They put it out for public comment. They got their public comments. They did a turn. Like they did all the things you would do if you're setting up like a real, legal program. And we've seen a number of nations like do this, some more quietly than others. I think, on the environmental impact side of this, look, we say like, I think internally in our company, we are torn. Like we're a big tent. Some of us are not necessarily full scale for this, and some people are. What I would say is I think these companies are going full scale, full steam ahead. And really our job is to offer them a lower cost, lower impact technological option. So I think a couple years ago, people would ask us, hey, like, do you think you're potentially like enabling these people? And like, I can tell you, we certainly have our allies and people who like this message of, hey, it's better for you and it's cheaper. But we certainly have people who, don't feel like anything is wrong and they're going for it, regardless of whether we are in that room or not.
So we'll continue the conversation. Move to you, Tim. You are one of the few VCs, early stage venture capitalists, who are focused on mining solutions. You're based out of Colorado. What inspired you to go this sector route and then into investing? If you mind sharing, please.
Yeah, sure. Good evening. My name is Tim. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I run a firm called Nomadic Venture Partners, and as you pointed out, we invest in critical minerals technologies in the entire mining value chain, all the way from prospecting and exploration to recycling we talked about. I was born into a mining country. I was born and raised in Mongolia. Mongolia is a very resource-heavy, dependent country. 80% of its exports are actually from mining, coal, copper, iron ore, things like that. So growing up, I've had family members who were drillers, truck drivers, geologists, and whether you like it or not, you become a geology nerd and take interest in rocks. Many years later, it was time for me to go to school, and I actually chose Colorado School of Mines to study mining engineering. So I started my career as a mining engineer, worked for a couple of different mining companies, AngloGold Ashanti, Newmont mining corporations. These are multinational, large companies with assets around the world. So after practicing, mining engineering, mining scheduling, and doing, things like, building a project, working on some really interesting design work, and doing some reclamation and closure, I decided to pivot my career and joined a firm called Resource Capital Funds. And that's a firm that was very much focused on building projects around the world through project finance. So I became an investor and spent several years deploying capital in many different really interesting jurisdictions, backing companies that have incredible resource and who need the capital to bring these projects online and help supply the critical minerals that we need. So when I was at Resource Capital Funds, I've looked at probably over 1,100 or 1,200 projects across the world. So these are individual mining projects that Jose talked about, right? Many of them don't get funded or get developed, and that's absolutely true. Even though we have a couple thousand of these projects around the world, only few come online, and they're very sort of messy, complicated nature as to why that's the case. And I know we talked a little bit about price manipulation and things like that, and what China has rolled out as strategies to prevent some of these incredible projects coming online. But about 5 years ago, I was having this conversation with a longtime friend of mine about this incredible oncoming demand for critical minerals due to these converging megatrends, such as the energy transition, national security concerns, and this incredible infrastructure built out for rebuilding of the electrical grid in the US, as well as building out the infrastructure for data centers. And if you put all these together, and if you look at the broader medium to long-term demand numbers, it was an incredible story, like a really, really cool story. I mean, it did actually feel like a gold rush at the time. But if you actually look at the supply side, and having gone through this exercise of evaluating a couple thousand projects, it was really tough to actually confidently say that you can meet this demand with traditional supply, right? Like finance projects, build them, and then actually deliver them to society. On average, it takes at least in the U.S. close to 3 decades to turn on a new project. A lot faster in certain parts of the country, the world. But it is around that 15 to 17 year timeline to bring a single project online. And in order to meet these demands that we have, we would have to build at least 300 new mines just in the next few years. So it's a very daunting task. And the obvious solution to us was we have to leverage innovation and technology to be able to actually bridge this gap between supply and demand,
Right.
especially in the processing side, right? If you look at how much resource we have in the U.S., we're actually pretty lucky, incredibly lucky in terms of the mineral endowment that we have. And what we don't have, which we touched on briefly earlier, is the processing and the refining capabilities. A lot of the resources that we currently mine in the United States are often sent to Mexico, Canada, places like Brazil, right, China for the processing, and then we buy those products back once they added value. So it was for us, a really an opportune time. We talked about vulnerabilities, right? In that presents a lot of different cool opportunities.
Yeah.
And as an investor, we saw this incredible opportunity to participate in this and help solve some of the challenges we have as a nation, but at the same time, hopefully make a lot of money doing it. So that's
you are an investor, and I'll
Yes.
use Jose's term that he said. Innovation is one way to avoid race to the bottom, and really come up with solutions that allow us to do this faster and actually even catch up at one point. Do you mind sharing an example of a company you're looking at that is coming up with an innovative solution with respect to processing?
Okay, maybe I'll just mention one of the portfolio companies we have.
Sure.
We invested in a company called Endolith. And Endolith is a really cool company because they're leveraging biology and microbes to increase the recovery of copper from existing mine sites by at least 2x, if not more than that, which is pretty fascinating. Copper is one of the largest commodity markets. It is very liquid, operates really well. You don't have this monopolistic behavior or a player that is dictating prices or manipulating prices. And what's also really interesting is that there are billions and billions of tons of material that have been mined historically that have incredible amount of value that all you need is just develop some technologies to be able to process them and produce the copper that we need, right? We talked, I think Dean JR mentioned how we only have 2 smelters, and that's an incredible opportunity for a company like Endolith, because instead of producing copper concentrates and then send it across the globe, you can actually produce copper cathode on-site in the US with this technology, and they've been incredibly successful today.
What's your perspective on deep sea mining?
I'm not. I think you're going to put me on the spot at some point. Look, I think one thing that I can agree on is, right, whether it's terrestrial mining, deep sea mining, or even space mining, pick your favorite. We got to do things responsibly, right? Like the part of our job, the key passion and mission that we have at LBJ Partners is to actually make mining more responsible, right? And how do you do that is invest in innovation and technologies that have very little, almost no impact, if possible, also do it fairly cheaply. And that's a very, very tough challenge. And whether it's deep sea mining, right? We're always looking at interesting innovation and hope to
I
make
thought
some
we
bets
had
that-
diplomats on this side of the panel, but we'll continue that conversation, Tim.
Sure.
We're not letting you off the hook on
Okay,
this.
fine.
We have to do a deal by the time we finish this panel. So Jose, we'll come to you. Thank you. Thanks, Tim, for sharing. We talked, the Dean mentioned actually some of the industrial policy they put in place going back to 2020, the Energy Act. Under President Biden, the Inflation Reduction has some significant resources that came online for supporting this industry. The Chips and Science Act had some aspect as well. President Trump has made direct investments, Department of Defense, $500 million in MP materials. So this is continued to build on. When you look at the actual active policy, what's your perspective on these? And just from your experience, having been part of the execution side of this, would love to hear your experience. What do you think we should double down on? Where you would be careful and thoughtful about how we implement this industrial policy?
Well, so one of the challenges that we had is, especially in mining, you're looking at a project that takes 3 decades in the U.S., but it'll take 8 to 15 years in other parts of the world. That's a long time. And especially at the beginning, when you're doing the prospecting, the feasibility studies and the like, it's risky. And then put the geopolitical pieces together, and that's even riskier. And so part of what we try to do, and I'm glad to see that the Trump administration is doing it as well, is to find funding, especially early stage funding. That's really where the rubber hits the road. Once you've got a feasibility study, once you can deal with the political aspects, it's a lot easier. And so what you've seen is a few transactions, loans or equity investments on the part of the U.S. in the last year or so that have been welcome. And it's something that other countries have done as well. If you look at Australia, if you look at Korea, Japan, Canada, EU, and others, they all have over $1 billion that they have created in sovereign wealth funds in order to invest in critical minerals. So that's quite welcome. Where I think we have not done as well as we should, to be diplomatic, is it's a little bit haphazard. There ought to be a way for us to do a couple of things. Number one, coordinate with the allies. We don't all want to be chasing the same rabbit. And also finding ways to engage not just with the government, but also the banks. We've got to bring the banks along. We created a forum for financing institutions to work together with banks. And so having a way of coordinating so we're not all chasing the same rabbit, and at the same time bringing in the private sector is something that we're going to have to do. Why? Because there's just not enough money out there in order for the government to invest. We've got to bring the private sector along, and at the end of the day, they are the ones that are going to have to run with the project.
So you mentioned Japan, Australia, Korea. All these countries have had dependence on China, just like we did. Any one nation comes to mind that we could emulate that has done a decent job reducing their dependence on China?
Well, I would say the Japanese have done a good job at finding, and it depends on the mineral. They've done a pretty good job at finding alternative sources of graphite. The Koreans as well. The Australians have tons of critical minerals and rare earths, and they've invested a lot of money, as have the Canadians. So I would put on the non-producing side, the Koreans and the Japanese. On the producing side, Australia and Canada. Both have created sovereign wealth funds. They have also brought the private sector in. It helps that Australia has companies like Rio Tinto that, by the way, has the biggest mine in Mongolia. Yeah. And so I would look at those but even those two countries wanted to cooperate with us, wanted to work with us because there wasn't enough money for it to suffice. They wanted to get the U.S. support. They wanted to get private funding, and I think there's more to be done there.
And you alluded to this, that there is, we shouldn't be haphazard, but what do you say to the fact that when you have the President of the United States directly involved in this case, critical earth deals? And I'll give you a few examples. In case of Ukraine, I mean, he literally was the architect of saying, let's have the DFC, Development Finance Corporation, put a fund together for reconstruction in Ukraine, and in exchange for Ukraine giving access to mineral mining resources. Pakistan, a country that U.S. has not struck a deal in this. He intervened. Pakistan's leadership was in Oval Office. I saw pictures in Financial Times of the leadership showing mineral earths, these rocks, to the President of the United States in the Oval Office. You've heard about Greenland, very aspirational moves in Bolivia as well. So these are very targeted when you put the weight of the presidency on these, bilateral deals. Things have to move. I mean, how do you respond to that?
I don't. I think it's great. It's something that you learn in government. I'm sure you saw it. If you get the top person to support you, the skies just part. I had many projects that the interagency was against me. Once the Secretary of State said publicly, he'll say, "This is a great project. I want you to go forward." Everybody wanted to be my friend. So you do want that top level, and that's very much welcome. I have actually read, and we signed a couple of critical mineral agreements. The Ukraine agreement, it provides for a fund. There's a war going on, and until you deal with that war, there's not going to be much mining. With Pakistan, it has to be. I talked at the beginning about execution risk. It's more than simply deciding that you're going to cooperate. You've got to find a project. You've got to get geologists involved, scientists involved, do feasibility studies, and then you've got to bring in the private sector and the funding. And that's going to take some time. So the jury's out. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to thank you, Jose. I'm going to open it up for Q&A now, just to get some of the questions of the audience, and we'll come back with more conversation. Please raise your hand, and if you could just share your name and your affiliation. Please, over to you.
Hi, y'all. My name is Holiday O'Brien. I'm a first-year PhD student at Jackson School, actually doing sort of critical mineral stuff. So I'm really happy to see a geologist on
Awesome.
that made me happy. So you've all sort of touched on this, but there's clearly a tension in sort of the policy between balancing international pressures and laws specifically with domestic needs and priorities, right, for critical minerals and mining generally. So how do you, and I'm kind of asking this to the whole panel, envision American policymakers moving to resolve that tension, and what role do scientists, namely our domestic geologists, play in building a multilateral solution? So I think I'm kind of pressing on workforce development here because I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Anna, do you mind taking a stab? And then we'll have everybody jump in?
And I think we were actually talking about this exact issue. So look, I think first it begins with conversations like this one, because I think there needs to be a broader conversation about what we want our society to be, what we want it to have, what we want our economic system to be. Nobody's going to accuse me of being a partisan hack here. So I can say I think this is one failure of capitalism. The reason that we're sitting here and discussing this, that's my feeling. And I think this is one where some elements of China's economy have shown to be working out in their favor. And in the case of, I think, for the energy transition, hopefully the world's favor. But I don't think it has to be like that. So I think first is starting with this big conversation. I think a couple years ago when I said what I was working on, people were like, that's really, really weird. What are critical minerals? And now, maybe people still have a lot of questions and pushback, but they've at least heard of critical minerals. So I think we have to get there kind of as a society where we have this conversation where we have to understand the trade-offs. Hey, do we want things? Okay, well, what's it going to take to produce those things? And that needs to be a conversation we have writ large. Then, I think one of the things that we were talking about is I came through an earth sciences department at a time where, I actually had optionality on hey, am I going to go, the way a lot of earth geoscience departments are kind of organized is you tend to be able to pick certain veins. And for me, my background was in math and applied math. And so that meant I got rocks, air, or water. And I came through my department at a time when actually a lot of our geologists had the really preeminent ones. My department had done really great work on like plate tectonics, and so we had some famous discoveries. And we went on the field courses, but a lot of those people who knew those people were like literally dying. Yes. Like as I was going through this department, and the priority for hiring was in things like climate and atmosphere and oceans. It's a big problem. It's a big priority. And so I think it's, and I've read things about like, hey, like people can't get funding for like rock collections, which like I can't imagine a rock collection costs that much money to house. Like I don't know, but so I think it's it's got to be some of this like funding. But I think to me, so like I think the talent and interest there. We were talking about how we've got all these programs in the United States. I think some of this is going to have to be like the culture shift too, because I think my experience was that the people who went through these programs like either had a family history, knew about like you knew about it, or like really loved rocks. Yeah. And as somebody who was like not on that far side of really loved the rocks, I think that meant that I was misinformed. Is I think the way of like how these things might solve bigger problems. So that's not like the entirety of the policy prescription. I would add on like, hey, you need like a couple pieces of funding for like early stage geoscientists, like to broaden the types of like if you're from the city and like you can't go see rock formations, like we need funding for that. We need funding for these rock collections that apparently are like getting tossed over the side of we had a rock pile in my department where all the departing geologists like left their rocks. And then, all on up towards the financial ecosystem to the type of stuff that you're working on, right? And like, you're taking on some of this, but you can't. Like you're one person.
Tell me your perspective on the workforce, and thank you, Anna. Like when you look at the workforce, there is a broad spectrum of workers. Sure. We're talking about obviously scientists and scholars and actual researchers, but you also need people who will get their hands dirty, right? To some extent. So, in reality, we just do not have, because we lost the industry, we just do not have the workforce. And that comes up always, and by the way, my students are working on Texas level state policies, and workforce is hopefully one of the things we're going to look at is that we need to develop workforce. That is a state subject, often is a local subject. So your thoughts on that, Tim?
Sure. I was one of 12 mining engineering graduates from the program that had the biggest program.
Wow. 1 out of 12.
1 of 12.
Wow.
Only a handful of us are still in the industry, so the others aren't. So that's the challenge we have, right? On an annual basis, our country only graduates, 600, 650, mining engineers. And the numbers have actually gotten up so significantly since I graduated, but it's still like in the hundreds, right? And if you compare that to China, we're talking tens of thousands of mining engineers being graduated on an annual basis. So you can see that the focus, right? The focus, and maybe it is just a byproduct of capitalism is if you don't have a lot of interest or demand for mining engineers, maybe right there's no need to actually graduate them. But I think we're in a very different point in time right now, though, right? Because this isn't just pure right treat humans as resources and say if we need 10 engineers, well then we gotta graduate 10 engineers, right? I think the world has changed dramatically. Supposedly we're in this post-globalization era where countries are becoming protectionists, right? They are sort of behaving like mercantilists, really trying to hoard resources for their own uses and use it as a leverage for trade and whatnot. So how do you operate in that kind of an environment is through a very different lens. I think, as Anna said, I think there are some plays in China's playbook could potentially be useful for us, right? And really focus on the importance of the workforce that is required to actually get us and achieve what we call the metals transition.
Right.
So absolutely, I think it starts with workforce. There's this incredible talent that's actually just retiring right now in the mining industry. What are we going to do after that, right? Is pretty bleak. Now, what I would argue as a technologist is that you would use technology and innovation to be able to enhance the remaining people who are working in this industry. Let me just ask you maybe, right? Who wants to go and live in Elko, Nevada and mine gold? Right? I don't even know if you could if anybody actually knows what Elko, you're probably the only one, right?
One of 12. Yeah.
So a lot of these mines, or the reason why the society have forgotten about them is because they don't actually operate in cities, right? They're literally in the middle of nowhere, out of sight, because geology is geology. It's going to occur where it's going to occur, right? And if it's not in a city, then you would have to, right, have that, interest to move your, life and family to a place that doesn't have Walmart, Target, all the things that you need, right? So it is an industry that has remained sort of under the radar, and have the industry itself also have done a poor job of actually doing outreach to the communities and to the public to tell its good stories, right? So I think there's so many things we can do to make this industry more exciting. I think a lot of people do realize the importance of it, and I think this recent awareness that the public have gotten around mining and critical minerals is really cool for me, because we've been doing a lot of this, building awareness exercise ourselves, just so that we can actually convince some, really smart PhD or postdoc to start a company like Anna did.
Yeah.
Right. Until then, right, the market's pretty tiny. But I would say that has changed significantly, over the past 4 or 5 years between the two administrations for that.
Thanks, Tim. We'd love to get Rose's perspective. I mean, did you see any country getting a playbook on workforce doing better than 12 engineers from a major school of mining, or your perspective?
Chinese.
Yeah.
Besides China.
I mean, I'll tell you something that there's a dichotomy here, and that is, I've been to the Colorado School of Mines. It's full of foreign students who come and study in the U.S. to magnets. So we've got the knowledge. What we need to do is to also train our own students as well, and that's sort of a challenge. You also, is it a failure of capitalism? I don't know. There are people out there who would argue that the reason that the PRC has succeeded in rare earths mining and critical minerals is that they've devastated the countryside. There has been an environmental cost. And is that a failure of democracy? I don't know. But what we do know is that there's been a failure on the part of the government to be a seed investor, to basically lay down the seeds for that. And so that's something to be discussed. And we have an urgent problem today because we haven't been able to graduate enough students, even though we've got great institutions, and we haven't been able to support early stage investments in, there's a company that I worked with called Cobalt, which is funded by Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. It's using AI to prospect for mines in Africa. It found maybe the largest copper deposit in the DRC. We need more of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have the knowledge. We just need to basically get the government incentives right in order to.
So you mentioned on the worker side that most of the folks that you saw in Colorado were born out of the United States. I would just say, look, I mean, one of the options is to have an immigration system that remains open to attracting. I mean, if China has thousands and thousands of engineers, and if we were to create and incentivize folks to come out here, we can close the gap, because we're not going to be able to meet close this gap in any near-term future. The math doesn't add up unless AI can literally do everything for us, which I don't think necessarily is foreseeable, is possible. So, but again, fascinating point. We'll take more questions and continue the conversation. Yes, sir, please.
James Galbraith, the LBJ School. I want to play the skeptic for a minute here. And my understanding is that the Chinese position is now that they will withhold the export controls for 1 year and evaluate the situation with respect to U.S. policy at the end of that year over presumably quite a large spectrum of issues, including the tariff issues, but perhaps also including provocations over Taiwan and other matters. So I wonder, first of all, if you could spell out for us what happens in a year if the boom comes down. We're talking about projects that would not pay off for 15 or 20 times that. So that's my first question. And if you could specifically address the issue of gallium, which is not a mining question, but a byproduct of the refining of bauxite into aluminum, where the Chinese advantage is presently 90 million metric tons a year to 1 million metric tons, and the production capacity is 600 tons of gallium to zero in the United States. So that is a problem which could not be solved by the deep sea or by any other mining enterprise. It's an industrial ecology problem, and I wonder how you would speak to it and what would happen if the reserves of gallium were not available to our advanced semiconductors.
So look, on your first question, by saying we'll revisit it in a year, you've created an uncertainty that's going to deter investment. I think we can all agree on that, right? If somebody tells me that a year from now I may or may not be able to go forward, I wait a year. And it's consistent with something that China has done in the past. What they have done in the past oftentimes is to threaten countries, not so much to deter that one particular country that's being threatened to stop doing what they don't like, but to basically get others thinking about that it could happen to them as well. So I had many meetings with Asian countries where I would ask them to do certain things, and they would say, no, I'm just afraid of the Chinese blowback. So the answer to your first question is uncertainty and the fact that you've got, it could happen to other countries, and that's something that I think is the objective on the part of the Chinese to maintain their domination. That's number one. On gallium, we had gallium is a byproduct. I remember talking to one of the largest mining companies out there, and the CEO said to me, Jose, if you had told me that you needed gallium 6 months ago, I would have found it for you. I throw it away. We did the same thing with germanium, another G. Are you the one person here who knows about germanium?
I submitted a grant on gallium and germanium.
All right, so this is getting really nerdy now, guys. But one of the export controls was on germanium, as you know. The MSP, what we did is I sent out an email to my colleagues, to my other 15 countries, and said, hey, does anybody have any extra germanium that they can sell? Well, it turned out, believe it or not, that the Congolese, the DRC, had a warehouse where they had 50 pounds of germanium just laying around. They knew not what to do with it. So they sent me an email saying, Jose, I got 50 pounds. What do you want to do with it? Well, I've got some buyers for you. What does that tell you? Why am I telling you this story? Be it germanium, gallium, and others, if we pool our resources, if we work together, the MSP included countries that had 55% of the world's GDP. We ought to be able to do something together. We're not going to be able to do it alone. And on gallium, germanium, and others, there is an answer. It's either the private sector getting, finding germanium if I give them enough time, or somebody in the Congo who's got the thing in a warehouse. So we're going to have, and this is part of my, something that I think any administration would benefit from, which is we're going to have a SWAT team, because these things are going to keep coming. Be it gallium, be it germanium, be it graphite and others. When you own 80% of the supply chain, you're going to use that. The old story about if you're the hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's going to happen. And so we have to organize ourselves as opposed to just going after the latest problem.
And there's one more thing that you're pointing out is, Jose, just as a call out, because I've seen you in action on this stuff. When you have 15 countries involved in a multilateral relationship, you build a trust. You've built a trust, and people share with you information over email, right? Or maybe on higher side, right? But that takes a lot of effort and caring, and what we used to call it nurturing in diplomatic circles, right? And sometimes that's is at odds when you have one-off deals and you're putting the weight of the presidency online. Tim, did you want to jump in there?
Just quickly, yeah. You brought up really good. I think you were singing I thought you were reading my pitch deck here when you said like we ought to invest in seed stage technologies and things like that. Like we want more investment in these kinds of technologies, and when you do have that, which some of those fundings are actually being announced and trickling down currently, and there is a call for germanium technology on germanium and gallium, which you submitted a proposal, right? And when that was announced, it was fascinating how quickly, because we talked to a lot of mining companies in the US, how quickly many of them actually reached out to us and said, hey, since you look at a lot of technology companies, do you have any company that you've looked at in the past that could potentially recover some of the gallium we are actually throwing away? Because we over this past 34 or 5 years of sort of lack of focus on this industry, a lot of the processing innovation or the interest in that has gone away. But now that there isn't a focus, all of a sudden people are making phone calls and saying, hey, we actually have a lot of this in our stream and we're just discarding them. Can we somehow recover it? And those conversations are actually happening here, domestically. There are about 54 metal mines in the U.S. currently that actually Colorado School of Mines recently published this paper that said that you can satisfy our domestic need for all of these critical minerals for 300 years without having to open up a single new mine, just by recovering these minerals from the existing streams of product that we're mining and produce it as a co-product or byproduct without having to discard it. So
that's an important statement you made. We're going to try to capture that because that's pretty compelling. Let me get a few more questions because I saw a number of hands. I'll go on this side. Sir, you, and then we'll come here. I'll try to remember. If I don't, please, be more energetic there too. Please go ahead. In the back, yes.
Not a first-year PhD student, a very long, old professor at business school, okay? I work a lot with ExxonMobil. And I'm curious about your perception with respect to capital, because I don't think it's necessarily a failure of capitalism. You just got to make the rules right. ExxonMobil, you know about the lithium mine they're talking about with brine salt. You know about their desire to do this, but it's got to. They need some kind of assurances around the uncertainty. Otherwise, they're going to cancel it, like they canceled the lithium mine. They're going to cancel Baytown and things like that. So what can you do from a policy perspective to get not $1 billion? I know that's a lot, but you need hundreds of billions of dollars. How are you going to get the ExxonMobils of the world to find the certainty to invest in these kinds of issues? That's the issue, I think.
Jose, how do you respond to that at-scale capital from the biggest ones?
Well, one of those mines closed because the lithium prices went down 80%. So what can you do? Well, you can have, you can have a cap, you can have a floor. There are, corporate lawyers can figure it out. But you are going to need the capital, and you're right, $1 billion is not enough. But if you have a lot of countries, we're not the only ones who have this problem. In fact, we were probably better off than most of the others. You go to other countries that have created sovereign wealth funds. Ultimately, companies are going to need some assurances, and that assurances is, it's if you want to be glib about it, they want to socialize the losses and privatize the gains, right?
Yeah.
And so how you do that, it's we know how to do it. We just need the strategy, and we need the funding, and then we've got to be able to do it right, because there's not a hell of a lot of money out there to waste or time.
And speaking of that strategy, with MP Materials, we agreed as an administration to have a price floor. We're guaranteeing price, similar to what we do with agriculture. And so there's a model there. Now, is it scalable? Maybe the president is talking to MBS at the White House to talk about sovereign funds investing as well. So there's a model there.
And the U.S. got equity too.
Yeah.
They got equity in that. So that's.
So I saw a number of hands. I'm going to do this. It'll be great if you all can share your questions. I'm going to try to pull them and then see if we can respond. That way, if we can get maximum number of questions in. I'll start with this side of the room, and then we'll go, and I'll try to do justice to everyone. So please, I saw your hand up, ma'am, right behind the dean. Yes, please.
Yeah, you ended up touching on it. I was going to ask about MP materials. You say there's an importance in strategy when it comes to price floors. If price floor was built into that deal, what sort of considerations need to go in to a price floor when the government is the one that's instituting it and is an equity holder in a company?
Great, thank you. Pancha.
My question, Anna mentioned about India. My question was, when you're looking at it from a geopolitical strategic lens, what were the conversations Jose had with Asian countries? Perhaps was India one of them? I know India and America have a relationship where India uses and treats a lot of e-waste and tries to extract critical minerals from them. So how would what were those conversations like? And if there was a fear of China, at least from the Indian vantage point, was that more on the lines of territorial sovereignty or economic rationale? Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Excellent. We'll touch India. I expected you to ask the question about India for sure. Michael, please.
Good evening, Michael Muth. I teach at McCombs. Two questions. The economist in me is begging to know, are there any substitutes, depending on what you're making? Number one. Number two, might a little historical perspective add any insight here? And by that I mean, I'm old, and that gives me the benefit of a lot of hindsight. And when I think about it, I don't remember critical or rare earth minerals being a thing until the last 5 or 10 years. When I think about when China essentially entered the world markets, when they entered the WTO 24 years ago, I'm just wondering, how did we do this before China took over?
Okay, thank you, Michael. Let me just make sure I didn't ignore this side. Were there any questions on this side? It's the quiet side. Okay. We'll get a couple of hands there. Sorry, you go ahead first. I know I saw your hand.
For sure. My name's Justin. I'm a first-year undergrad studying systems engineering and hydrogeology, so it's a dual degree with the School of Engineering and Geosciences. My question for you guys is, there's a lot of different methods in terms of more the enhanced resource recovery, whether it be like hydrometallurgy and looking at mine waste, or also like kind of produce water from oil fields. So when it comes to both an investment and like a policy standpoint, how do you guys decide what technologies to subsidize or invest in strategically, and what outlet does that look like, whether it be academia or startups or other methods? Like, how do you guys make those decisions? Thanks.
Okay, I'll take one more question, then have you answer, because I don't think I'll be able to justice to this. There is not common thread here. I'll come back to you later on. There was just one more hand. I think you had it, please.
I'm Meeta Kothare. I'm the director of the Global Sustainability Leadership Institute and a professor of practice here. My question is about finance. Jose talked about sovereign funds a lot, and the U.S. is unlikely to do something like that, I think. But when we keep talking about bringing the private sector in, we've got folks like Tim who are probably not likely to invest in these long-term projects as VCs. So when does the government how long does the government need to be the seed investor? The average VC is not Bill Gates and Bezos, right?
Okay, great. So there's a question about financing, about business model, about how do you pick. I'm going to have the panel, and if you can be a little bit brief on responses, because there's a lot of questions, I didn't get hopefully all of them. Tim, can I have you respond to this? What's your horizon? What's your timeline on these investments? I know you're early stage, but you do have follow-on deals. You bring in others. So any quick perspective on that? And also, if you can also cover, the question on how do you pick technology given the feasibility?
Yeah, great question. So I used to be a project financier, right? So a lot of these projects would really take 10 plus years, and you had to be really, really patient as an investor. As a venture capitalist, we're less patient, I have to say. And we don't have the patience to wait for these new projects to come online. In fact, right, I think as long as that dramatically gets disrupted or reformed, I think technology has an incredible role. Like I said, right, I think we have the resources, whether it's recycling, reusing stuff, right, recovering things before we discard them. You just have to apply apply innovation and the technology to people. It's not like we're trying to invent a whole new thing, right? Like we're not here talking about inventing or making fusion feasible. This is simply right? A muscle that we used to have and we haven't exercised in the past 3 decades. So I'm actually very optimistic. I'm actually very optimistic that many of the investments we're making will be able to provide a lot of the critical minerals, unless things like deep sea completely changes the game.
Which it will, and you're going to regret if you don't come in. Okay, now is the time. We have to get this done. But speaking of that, substitute. That question came up, and if I may, you're also broadly like another potential angle there. Would you like to address that question?
Yeah, well, I think somebody asked the question about like, hey, what did we do pre like China and the WTO? And the answer was we didn't have as much things that were electrified, right? Like we relied on a fossil fuel system that. We had steam engines, we had, that's going way farther back, right? But we had a different tech stack. Like our consumer technologies didn't have like chips in them, for example, right? So things have changed in terms of what that looks like. I mean, in terms of like asking about material substitutes, we're seeing that in the EV market, right? Like we're seeing this whole conversation about, like the range on cars and the battery chemistries. And so we're seeing the Chinese EV market adapt and try and get away from using things like cobalt and nickel that are one of the things that people are really interested in deep sea mining. The trade-off there, though, is like for the American consumer, like we don't have that type of built infrastructure to support that type of rapid charging or those types of like battery swaps, or we haven't built the infrastructure that solves that problem for the American consumer in our current economic system in a way that makes people want to spend money on that. And so like, as a result of that, we're living in a world in which we're not meeting our expectations about our electrification of our vehicles. And so it's easy to say, oh, we can like substitute materials. We can, but we also have to be willing to pay the cost, and we have to be willing, like we have to all decide on where we're going with this, which I don't think we're all on the same page.
And that's where policy comes in, that's where incentives comes in, that's where the industry comes in. There's some great minds here who I'm sure hopefully can help us with solutioning. So Sovereign Fund came up as a question from the front here. Should the US consider that, Jose? Is that, this is something that, we explore?
I'd like to see a sovereign wealth fund of some kind. At the end of the day, a lot of this stuff can be solved with investment and money. And we just, we have the DFC, they've got a lot of money to invest. But it just takes, there's a lot of levers that you have to pull before you get it done. We've got to streamline the process. So I see the sovereign wealth fund as having a one-stop shopping aspect to it. To your other question, though, which was how long do we nurture, right? I think I've got a personal problem with U.S. companies, frankly, and some of it I think can be dealt with on the educational side. U.S. companies do not like uncertainty, do not like to go into emerging markets. I made a living in emerging markets. I would say to people, if you want to go to Switzerland, go ahead, rule of law, transparency, but you won't make any money, right? So you've got to find, our companies have got to get into the game, not only because it's a business opportunity, but because it's also a strategic imperative. To the question on what did we do before, China came up 5 years ago, 10 years ago with the Made in China 2025. A lot of these things, and you know what? It's going to get worse. If you read the International Energy Agency reports, Outlook, they expect that by 2050, the world will need 42 times the amount of lithium it uses today. 42. Just imagine what the vulnerabilities will exist in that case if we don't deal with it. Then your question on India and the MSP, they were a great partner. India has a certain weight in international fora that the U.S. does not, right? And vice versa. We could go with them to places in Latin America and Asia. They were a lot more comfortable in places like Africa. And so finding ways to work together, again, because if their vulnerability was our vulnerability. We import, God knows, 90% of our pharmaceutical ingredients from India. I think we worked well together, and they were a great partner.
Jose, you're using past tense here with respect to India relationship. This has come up before as well. I mean, there has been obviously a bit of a reset. We still haven't really struck a trade agreement. I saw recently that we're getting better at this. Hopefully, we'll have that in the tunnel. But you don't see necessarily any hiccups with respect to rare earth minerals in India going forward.
I don't know. That's for another day.
Okay, all right. We'll go to this side of the room to get some more questions. And any hands before? Let me just have you in the back, please. Yes.
Hi, so my name is Nicole. I'm doing a lot of research with deep sea mining with the Strauss International Security Center. But firstly, I'm a scientist first. I have a chemistry degree. So I'm a big nerd about the technology of deep sea mining. So I'm really excited to have you here discuss. But what I've investigated recently is a lot of national security implications of deep sea mining. The same location of certain seabed areas in the world, there are also undersea cables. China has research vessels that they're using as a science research cover to conduct reconnaissance of Australia, the United States with their submarine technology. So there's, the commercial side, which is why we're here today, but I would like to get your thoughts on more of the national security angle and how the United States is kind of working with that while also increasing the innovation of deep sea mining.
That's a great question, Nicole. We'll come to that, and you know who's going to answer that question here on stage. You were, I think I saw your hand as well. Did you have a question? Yes, please go ahead.
So like you mentioned, Jose, China basically destroyed their countryside doing this mining. So my question is, what sorts of innovations are US companies making that can make this process cleaner so that we can actually do it in the US?
Okay. So we'll have Anna respond to some of the national security issues that were raised by Nicole.
Yeah. Okay. So the tea is right now there is so there's this country called the Cook Islands, which is like in a mostly independent state that is like a member of the Crown and in semi-free association with New Zealand. And so right now there's this Chinese vessel that is like coming through doing research. I'll just leave it at that. Right after the Americans came in and like NOAA did this research cruise, and it's literally like 2 weeks later or something. Yeah. So there's like a lot going on is the short way of saying this. And I think, I'm hearing a lot about this conversation about like U.S. versus China and like, is it taking to the maritime stage? It's tough to tell exactly what's happening in China versus, for me at least, like on deep sea mining versus what are fears that I hear being propagated, in the United States. And so, I do think we might have to admit that there is a bias there. But I think the more interesting story actually is what are the Pacific Island nation leaders doing about it? Because some of these guys are playing people like a fiddle, and then like some of these folks, are not. And so it's interesting to see like, who are the elder statesmen, what's the turnover there, like what are people's relationships? And I think one thing I had not appreciated as an American who kind of knew about the Pacific from afar, who had maybe had more of like a Hawaiian angle on things, is like how diverse and how interconnected like the modern Oceania is, and how many people have like deep-seated ties with all of these powers, whether it's like America, whether it's China or whatever. So I think like the more interesting question is not like, hey, is this going to be like China versus the US? But it's like, are the Pacific leaders, how are they navigating that space? And, who's going to come out ahead? Because I think they're trying to play both sides of that coin to their advantage. And so we'll have to see if they can do that successfully or if, I think there's like a Chinese saying about this, like when the elephant and the, tiger play, like the mouse gets trampled or something. Someone can correct me on that later. But, like I think, that's the question is, can some of these folks come out ahead in this race? And I think that's what I've seen a lot of these nation states are banking on.
Thanks, Anna. Jose, I know you wanted to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this because this is going to get to the forefront real quickly, this issue of subsea. The fact of the matter is no one really knows what the environmental damage could be. It's too deep, nobody has been there. And that gives many countries a pause. In fact, at last count, you had over 30 countries that are on record as being against it. On the other hand, I had oodles of coming to my office of of island leaders because they see the opportunity, and especially with climate change, they don't have many options. There's a legal angle here which is important, and that is there's something called the Convention on the Law of the Sea that was negotiated in the 70s, approved by most countries. The U.S. never signed it, not a party to it, even though our policy was that we would follow it even if we hadn't signed it. Well, the agency that gives out concessions is created by the Law of the Sea. And so if you're not a party to the Law of the Sea, can you give anybody a concession, especially in the high seas? The answer is, from a legal point of view, the answer is no. But that may not necessarily be the answer that people want to hear. So stay tuned. This is going to be fought at several levels. No pun intended.
And maybe just to clarify on that, like some of the stuff I'm talking about is happening purely in domestic waters, right? Like, so the Chinese are going, this is not the high seas.
That's right.
So, like, this is, I think, what's happened. We just got to hear from the former International Seabed Authority Commissioner, Michael Lodge. And I mean, essentially, even he's like, the UN is functionally irrelevant in this space right now. So what you're having is that, like, it's shifting from this multilateral conversation at the UN to these one-on-one discussions where you've got like the Chinese coming to the Cook Islands and then like transiting, and that's a really big shift.
No, that's true, but you're right. But the real rocks are in the deep sea international waters.
No. I mean, the Cook Islands has really significant, has like billions of dollars of reserves that are quite economically significant.
I have their nodule. All right, to be continued.
This is Tim. We have a diligence happening on stage right now on the deal. You need to keep, obviously, this is a pretty interesting conversation, but I appreciate that. My apologies, we lost your question. Could you repeat your question very briefly, and then we'll get this as well?
So you mentioned China, basically destroyed their countryside, including rare minerals.
That's right, ecological issues. How do we balance it?
Technologies are U.S. companies developing?
Well, I mean, we have better technology and we have better practices. We have something called the FCPA Act that doesn't let you bribe government officials. We have shareholders that demand that companies comply with good practices. That is the kind of debate we need to have, because if it's about who can pollute the most, we ain't going to win that one. And so that's how you change the terms of the debate. But you're right. I mean, it's created a lot of ecological damage in China. But at the same time, the Chinese will tell you, they're getting better, and that's true. They are getting better at this. And secondly, it's a price they've had to pay to be leaders in EVs, in all sorts of renewable energies and the like. That's the choice they made.
Tim, do you mind weighing in on this from an innovation perspective? You see a lot of deal flow. Are there opportunities that excite you with respect to, managing this better than wreaking havoc to our Mother Earth?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thesis behind our investment, our thesis, right? I think ultimately when you think about it, right, whether you do it here or in China, right, we're all paying the price. We're all paying the price, and we've just exported the environmental costs to other countries, right, that have lesser environmental standards or sometimes no standards at all. So when you think about a lot of these problems more broadly, right, there's an economic opportunity, and also to do it in a much better way, right? I would rather actually have a lot of the mining done here in the U.S. just because we have better standards. Also just talked about how we have a lot of these governance standards that would prevent some of these damages broadly. And I think if we can do that, it's not just good for the environment, but it's also great economically. And I think when you look at innovation that's actually happening in the U.S., a lot of them are actually focused on that, which is great to see. Most of the companies we look at have very minimal sort of impact risk, which is amazing, and which is why I'm very big optimist when it comes to having these innovation and technology solve a lot of our problems here. Not to comment on specific companies, but I think going back to a couple of the companies that we have in our portfolio, they're basically right. The thesis is to go after existing stockpiles, existing waste, valorizing, right, waste dumps, tailings, that have a lot of this stuff, right? Obviously, the big question is right, can you do it economically? And I think we can, and that requires more capital, more research investment from our governments to investigate a lot of these things and eventually get them in the hands of many of the operators.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to take one last question from the audience, and then I will have one final question for you guys. Someone who has been patient and we didn't, have them. I think you, yes, sir, in the second row, please.
Okay, I'll just go back. I'd like to touch on the substitution risk question that was asked earlier. And I just want to give a story about semiconductor manufacturing. That was my area of expertise. I exported equipment in semiconductor manufacturing to Taiwan and Samsung. Some would argue I was too successful in that arena and created some of these problems. But it goes back to the people risk, the discussion that we're having on environment, because the reason we did that was we were in a rush. Capital wanted payoff. You could build fabs in those countries faster. You could operate them more cheaply. The equipment cost the same worldwide, but you could build the building faster there. Right. You killed 10 times as many people, but you could build the building faster there. You could operate the building more cheaply there because industry is prioritized over the populations in those areas. So if there was an energy shortfall, there was no doubt that the neighborhoods were going to lose power. The industry was going to run. And the top 10 polluted rivers at the start of my career when I was in my 20s was in Europe and North America. All top 10 rivers are in Asia now in terms of metal contamination. So the question is, what goes back to your question, Anna? What is it that we want? What are we seeking? The capitalism worked within the confines it had. Make money as quickly as possible. A lot of things we should have prioritized, we didn't. And we are not leveraging our advantages. So, for example, energy efficiency. Our industry, U.S. industry is 3 times, our energy production is 3 times more carbon efficient than China's. But we refuse to price carbon, even though that would be to our advantage. We're the only E20 country that has nothing, no vision for that carbon emission. And that's hurting ourselves. We're hurting ourselves. We're forfeiting use of that advantage.
This would be a very long response, but I'm going to see if our panel experts can answer it in a, if you were to pick, if you were to prioritize at the top of your list, a bit of a controlled response request, what would you do? Start with Anna and Tim and Jose, please.
Oh my God, how would I fix capitalism to solve climate change and electrify our system? Okay, go. Look, I will admit, I think policy is part of it. I will admit, this is embarrassing because I went to the University of Chicago. I am a carbon tax hater, doubter, and skeptic. So I would say, I would be a hater, and I would say, no, 2007 called. They want their policy back. So I just think we're kind of past that point. So I think we do have to think about a little bit more creative of a solution that leverages our strengths. To put it, I think we've got some of those strengths here, which is abundance of capital and cultural willingness to innovate. And I think that is a strength that we can and should lean into. And this is also a way of saying what I'm doing is highly risky. And so if I need a job in another year, I hope someone can hire me. And I'm glad we live in a society that, is not going to send me out to the boonies with I don't know, a glass of hemlock or something a la Socrates. So I think those are the things that are really successful that we need to leverage if we're going to continue to have that. And then I think the other thing we need to do is see where we can get to in terms of understanding of what do we want to pay for? What are the outcomes we want? And this will have to happen at the local level. I'm thinking of Prop Q failing, as well as at the national level where we're thinking about our.
So you're saying innovation, risk taking,
innovation, risk taking, and some type of consensus.
Absolutely.
I might say there might be a world where we might have completely separate sort of markets, right, with very different pricing, right, that actually includes some of the premium. Now, is that sustainable? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people have argued, right? If you talk to these mining companies, they'll say, well, just pay us the extra. We'll produce it sustainably. And it's fascinating how they openly talk about this stuff, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a commodity that has global pricing, right? When you have a commodity that you have a global price and there's no price differentiation, right, between how well you produced it versus you didn't, right? You just don't get that extra incentive. So I think whether we need a different pricing sort of a market that rewards those, or somehow we punish those who don't, right? Like I think it's going to be really interesting because it's a really, really tough problem, and ultimately, it's at the end of the day, right? It goes back to economics, and many countries or companies, have a pressure to deliver shareholder value, and that may actually be.
So you're
an
leaning
outdated
towards
model.
innovation business model, like that, and that's something that you obviously look at in deals and how people can actually.
We think about it very pragmatically. I think ultimately what we want is this, right? Can we produce whatever the commodity is faster, cheaper, and do it sustainably, right? And you have to be very careful and very selective in which markets you participate in. I think we are bunching all of these commodities into this broader critical minerals bucket, which is very dangerous because every single one of them have a unique market. Every single one of them have very different dynamics, pricing dynamics that we have to be mindful of and pick and choose, right? A lot of people are talking about critical minerals. I get this question all the time, right? Why aren't you investing in rare earth element technology companies? And maybe I won't get into the whole discussion here, but our stance is we just don't see enough incentive for private investors to actually invest in that market, and resolve a lot of the uncertainties that Jose talked about.
So Jose, you have on your shoulders the public sector response here, given that you're saying that you need support there. Your thoughts?
I don't have a silver bullet or a magic wand. Look, a few years ago, the critical minerals vulnerability of the U.S. was a theoretical exercise. We've seen in the last few months that it is no longer a theoretical exercise. We've seen how the PRC can exercise that against the U.S. I am concerned because we are not synchronized, organized, and if you look at the last couple of years, including, by the way, during the time that I was in government, the PRC dominance of critical minerals has increased. So this is not getting any better. I'd like to see, if I had an ask here, is we've got to have a sense of urgency here, because A, this is not going away, and as I said earlier, it's in fact going to get worse unless we get our act together.
Thank you. The last question that I asked the panelists, and we'll have to be brief because the team is looking at me and you have to end, is that imagine yourself sitting in this room when you were in college. We have a lot of students here who are graduating soon or will be heading to workforce. You look at unemployment rate in the country for young people. It's at its lowest in almost a decade. We see AI as a disruptive force whose effects are not fully yet clear. And then you see these opportunities that we just talked about here. What is your advice to that yourself in the audience with this hindsight of obviously amazing careers that you'd like to share? Well, Jose, we'll start with you.
Well, when I went to school in the 1800s, I had a different answer. First of all, recognize what you have. You've got some pretty bright, not only just smart professors and deans, but you also have, you guys are accomplished, you're smart, you worked hard. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, there's a lot of people like you. And part of what you need to do is figure out the angle. What is your angle? What makes you different? And if you're not different, how do you become different? AI will provide opportunities, and we're seeing how it can also hurt the workforce. So from my background, and again, most of my life has been as a lawyer, not as a diplomat. There's a world out there that needs what you have: your brains, your knowledge, your work ethic. I would try and, go outside the U.S. for a while. See how other people think. See what the opportunities are. Everybody wants infrastructure. Everybody wants energy. Everybody wants technology. Well, some of that you have. So just find the angle, and And when you come back, maybe you can all pay for my Social Security.
It will be solvent, hopefully. Anna.
I mean, I think I told myself, like, keep going, keep pushing. Like, you guys are smart. You probably don't need, I don't know, us now old people up here telling you what to do. So yeah, I'd say keep going. Like, you're here at, like, it's 8 o'clock at night and you're listening to us yap about this. So
That's amazing.
Yeah, right. Like, this is my idea of a good old time, and it sounds like it's your idea of a good old time too, which might not say good things about you, but I think it does mean that, like, you're well poised for success. So I would say, if that's you, keep going, keep pushing. You're probably on the right track, and you don't need me to redirect. And I'll just add to that, like, I don't know, get organized on some of these policy solutions.
Great, thank you, Anna. Tam.
Maybe I'll ask a question. Who likes to travel? A lot of you, right? So mining is actually one of the most international industries, right? If you join the industry, you get to travel to not just 1 or 2 countries, right? But like dozens and dozens of countries. And I think it serves a lot of the points that my colleagues have mentioned at the panel. And I think that's one of the reasons why I also joined the mining industry, is to actually get that exposure and satisfy some of my interests in traveling around the world, because the geology is the geology, right? All these deposits exist in some really exotic places, really cool places. You got to go to Cook Islands, right? Not many people get to go to these really cool places. So I think if you like to travel, and if you want to do that in an industry that is extremely critical, not to use a pun, and also imagine yourself, right? Again, Anna mentioned this gold rush, right? Like, you're at this incredible point in time where the gold rush is about to happen, and at the same time, sort of our government is actually looking at the situation as like the Sputnik moment again, right? It's saying, like, holy cow, we have another country that's leading the race in critical minerals, and we're going to do everything we can, throw a lot of capital at it to try to solve this. And I think there's a lot of cool opportunities embedded in that, and I think that should excite you if you want a joyful, enjoyable career. That's also meaningful.
Awesome. Let's give our panel a And I want to give a quick shout out to the people who help us put this together. Here is Jennifer there, right? If you can raise your hand. Shante, Mary, right next to the dean. And so thank you for all your great work, and thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.
Awesome.